Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and today we're going to talk about the hot topic, junk slabs. Junk slabs are here to stay for the foreseeable future, and we're going to talk about what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you as a buyer, a seller, and what does it mean for the overall market? Junk slabs, it's a borrowed term, I think, from the junk wax era in the 90s. If you're not boomer enough to remember that, back in the late 80s, early 90s, there's a huge explosion of interest in sport cards, very similar to what we had in 2020. A ton of new people coming in. And because of that, all the companies looked at each other and like, you think when I'm thinking score? You thinking when I'm thinking upper deck? Yeah, we're going to print like 10 versions of everything now and just bury everybody with supply. So because of that, there was way too much saturation and people started calling that early 90s product junk wax or the junk wax era because no one was really interested in it. The prices stayed the same. I remember when I got back into Pokemon, started buying some sports stuff that I remembered. It stayed the exact same price it was from the 90s. So, fast forward to today. We have our box of Trubbish back here of junk slabs that don't really have much added value. And I think that's the shortest way to describe what a junk slab is. That's why it's called junk slab, not junk card. It's when you take a card and grade it, and the grade really doesn't add much, if any, value. And we are seeing that to the most extreme level we've ever experienced. So naturally, why? Like, why are we getting this right now more than ever? Well, it's because everybody and their dog is hashtagging it up. We're all hashtag entrepreneurs. We're all hashtag doing big moves. We're hashtag grind setting all the time now. And there's so many grading companies. There's so many people trying to hustle and make it. And the market's in a very, it's all going to self-regulate at one point, but it's in that upward motion of everyone trying to capture this process. Like with the 80s, 90s sports, it's the same deal. Everyone's trying to capture those gains. With that, you're getting so much increased volume in the market right now that there's so much downward pressure from these junk slabs that are adding a great value for buyers and a terrible scenario for new sellers. So I wrote down a little hierarchy, a little checklist. If you have these, you might have a junk slab in your possession. Number one, if you have a non-PSA graded Pokemon card, sub 9 grade. So if it's not PSA and it's sub 9, that's one of the big indicators. Another one is pretty obvious for most people. If it's not rare or popular, that's another risk. And then last but not least, if your card's raw value is sub $10, that's another added risk. So if you have 3 of those, you might be in danger of owning a junk slab. I think another way to break it down, to paraphrase the other Scott on E4, the bunny lover, Piffy, if your eBay fees make or break your profit, you might have a junk slab. If your card doesn't earn the $10 minimum PWCC, you might have a junk slab. And there are plenty of examples of that. A great case study is that little screenshot that's now a meme on E4, low-key meme, of CGC, 8 Squirtle, 8.5 Blastoise V Japanese, all had 0 bids. Literally ended at $0. So those are great examples of what a junk slab represents. Again, if you like the card, if you want to collect the card, more power to you. It's just that when that card is graded, there is literally in that case no add value whatsoever. Like, no one's willing to buy that card. So this is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. You have a ton of people just competing with one another, and ultimately what it's going to do is create a ton of upside for buyers and create a lot of downside for the hashtag big movers out there. It's going to be a lot harder to compete when you're messing around with the low margins. I talked about this in Patreon. I'll talk about it a little bit here. I did recently a higher volume consignment block, and I would say safely I'm on the upper tier of the mountain. I usually try to aim for the higher value cards. I think everyone knows that. It's pretty synonymous with what I do. So if I'm noticing this on a few of my lower end auctions, that means there's a whole ecosystem down here of like polywags and everybody. Like, I'm the sperm whale, but there's some low level plankton, flipping that $1 profit, doing that grind that the smpratte via 2010 was doing. And that arena is going to get buffeted the most by junk slabs. If you're dealing with those low margin, high quantity cards, that is the highest offender for the junk slab costs, as a seller. But the good news is, if you're a buyer right now, there is so much buying opportunity. Also talking in Patreon about some of the like PSA 7 to 8 of these Japanese promos, I think, in my opinion, have good fundamentals, especially the vintage stuff. I think it's a fantastic time to buy that as a collector. You have so many people competing and trying to get some of those gains, trying to grab some of that market share. And because of that, you have so much more supply than ever coming in. And if you're really really trying to over optimize, you can do a lot of arbitrage and say, okay, well, I know this non-PSA company usually gets this much average, and even though they're really strict, et cetera, and you can figure out this card's actually in near mint condition. I'm going to buy it for like less than what it would be raw. And I think that's the beauty of, if there is a silver lining to junk slabs, is that they're going to create a great environment for buyers. Buyers are going to have plenty of time to pick their poison. They're going to have plenty of time to sit there and be like, you know what? I could get that raw card on Troll and Toad, or I could go get this PSA 7 or 8 copy for less. And that is a dream. Back in 2016-17, I've said it so many times, the poster child for this was the PSA 9 WotC Hollows. They were hitting a price point of like $20 to $40 already graded, where it didn't make sense to go throughout the good old rod, try to see if you got a mint ungraded copy, process it through PSA with whatever costs, you'd still be breaking even, if not paying a little bit more. Where now, that is so much more exaggerated because the grading cost is much higher. If you go with a non-PSA company, you're adding more risk of volatility and less assurance ultimately. And, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to downgrade the hustle. Like, honestly, I know everyone's trying to make a living out here. It's people's livelihoods, but there are plenty of no-name companies that will literally be no names, especially when PSA reopens. And I think that's one of the latter points I wanted to hit here, is that a lot of this is heavily dependent on PSA being closed and all these like A, B, C, D, whatever 3-letter companies that pop up every week or so. All these grading companies are trying to grab that market share, and a lot of them are going to dissolve. Going back to the sports analogy, the sports reality of what happened, you had the same thing going on. I think I still have some. We got a beauty right here. We got a MGA, Gem Mint 10. This mod champ is like a absolute veteran. This is like someone, we got multiple cauliflower ears here on the back of this Machamp. Like, this thing has so much whitening on the back, but it's apparently a 10. It's apparently Gem Mint. So this is a great example. One of the many defunct grading companies that existed back in that sports bubble, even in the early 2000s. You had all these people trying to grab that market share, and most of them dissolved. Most of them don't exist anymore. And this was part of that junk slab downward pressure. It added more pressure to the market. It gave more options for people to buy. In this case, you're buying something that is trying to borrow from, let's say, PSA or whatever company back then that was the standard, and obviously it's not delivering. So these are one of the things that are going to probably be a thing of the past in a couple of years. You're going to see a lot of 3 alphabet companies that you heard about today that won't be here in a few years, and that's because of this junk slab process. Junk slabs are really just a slang for a market condition that is a ton of supply, ton of competition, ton of supply, and it will self-regulate. That's the final point here, is this is nothing new. We've been here before. I remember during the 2020 mania, I was trying to be the calm, cool, and collected message throughout all the noise and hype and just craziness, and telling people we've been here before. We did this before, not only in Pokemon, it's happened all the time. These growth cycles happen all the time. This one's definitely a major one, but we have other major ones to look at in history. The 80s, 90s sports bubble is you can learn a lot from it and carry it over today. And I think we're seeing a very one-to-one example of that. It's just at a higher scale. You have the internet, you have a lot of people that can, connect. There's more connectivity now. There's more synergy now. You have so many things, so many people, and so many countries that just can get into this in a larger scale than in the 80s and 90s, but it's still the same fundamental process. You're going to have so many, not only companies that disappear, but all these junk slabs just going to add downward pressure. It's why also, final point, if you stuck around, you're getting the real nugget here in the video. It's why you could do the arbitrage with the auction houses. It's because there's so much downward pressure sometimes, even within a moment of like an auction block of maybe 1,000 cards, 2,000 cards. That is a lot of volume in one block. There's going to be some cards in there that get lost in the fog, and you can pluck some of those, drop them on eBay, and double your money. I use some of those real examples in Patreon. So that is, again, the reality of this junk slab, whatever you want to call it. I hesitate to call it an era because there's plenty of cards that really aren't affected by this. The cards are good fundamentals. They just don't care. They have no chill. They don't care about this. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of, non-PSA graded sub 9 cards. Cards aren't rare, popular, sub $10 raw. That's a high offense potential, high potential to be a junk slab. So there you go. This is one of those things I can just go on and on and on about, but we got to cut it here. Don't want to turn this into like a 30-minute diatribe, but that's the takeaway, is this junk slab scenario or situation is really creating a lot of downward pressure that's going to benefit buyers, and it's tough for people, who are trying to do the hashtag grind set and start at the bottom there and try to, hustle those very low margin cards. And what you're going to see is that the people who can absorb that, the big companies that have the crazy bankroll and, they roll those numbers every month. They're like, okay, whatever. I don't care if we take losses on these cheap cards because we have all this other, revenue coming in. Me and like smpratte via 2009-10 would have been buffeted a lot more than smpratte today, because I've scaled that mountain a little bit more. But those people at the bottom trying to hustle, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a grind. And, you're going to have to be a little more nimble and look for things that, maybe have better fundamentals and things like that. But for buyers, fantastic news. I don't see this changing significantly at all, at least for next year. I think if you are looking at some of these cards, whether it's modern, even some of this vintage stuff, everybody and their dog is grading today. So it creates a fantastic opportunity for buyers, a very competitive environment for new, lower volume sellers. So there it is, guys. As usual, the deal. Let me know how I feel. And that is pretty much everything I have. Till next time.